Welcome to our discussion of SQL metadata. Metadata is information about the structure of the data. So SQL is self-describing. It's one of its greatest strengths. So when MySQL Workbench, for example, is attached to a MySQL server, it starts out knowing nothing about the databases and tables that are served by that server. Workbench then issues a series of metadata queries to get the databases administered by that server. Of course, the server's response is restricted by the credentials of the logged-in user. The root user sees all, so we can see all databases and all tables. But if you were a logged-in user that had permission to say one database and one table within that database, you could even be restricted to seeing one or two columns in that table. That's the only metadata information that the SQL server will respond with. That is, it'll be conditioned on the permissions of the logged-in user. So think about this. There are many programmer tools to assist you with SQL coding and that use this self-describing nature of SQL in order to do that. For example, there are tools that use SQL metadata to generate Java or C# classes that represent SQL table structures. You can go the other way too. If you have a Java class, you can ask these tools to generate a SQL tables create statement for you from the Java class. So never write this type of code without first looking into automated tools that can do it for you. So, the MySQL show command. There are several ways to query metadata in SQL, but the show command is simple. It's a Swiss Army knife command, so it can do, I think, almost everything. Don't memorize it. Remember that it exists, and if you end up in a job where you're using it a lot, you'll just remember it because of that. But here's a good reference. w3resource.com. There are many fine pages on this, and you can find on the database, on the internet. All right, let's look at some examples. Okay, I have in this script several show commands, starting ones with the administrator might be interested in. Let's execute this one, show engines. So what are engines in MySQL? Engines are the kernel storage engine that MySQL uses to store data, to actually do the heavy lifting. All SQL instances, SQL Server, Oracle, use the idea of a database storage engine. However, MySQL is unique in surfacing the different storage engines that it supports and having plug-in storage engines. The one we use by default is InnoDB, and that's the enterprise level storage engine. It supports transactions, low-level, row-level locking, and foreign keys. The other alternative that sometimes you see in use is MyISAM. The MyISAM database storage engine was MySQL's original storage engine. It's fast and it's small, but it doesn't support enterprise level SQL. Show privileges, another tool of interest to an administrator. So these are all possible privileges that might be granted to a user of the MySQL database. Show grants. These are the privileges of a particular user, in this case root at localhost. And we can see grant all privileges on star.star to root at localhost with grant option. So that's essentially everything in the database. With grant option means you're able to grant privileges to other users. So the root user is able to create users and grant them privileges. So any user that you want to be able to create users and grant the privileges has to have the with grant option. The at localhost is an interesting aspect to this root user. It means server is on a machine and it has an open port. Any machine on the network can see that if the ports aren't blocked. However, you will not be able to log into my particular instance of MySQL from another machine because you have to be root at localhost in order to be able to log in as this root user. So that's a physical security level, right? You have to be at the machine. to view this root. Show all databases. So here we're getting into queries that are useful for MySQL Workbench. Show the, they call them schemas here, they're databases. Show databases. And then, of course, you can drill down. Show tables, for example, in classic models. And that's a drill down into the classic models, the tables it supports. And then show the creation of that database. See if we can create database classic models. And then also create table within it, the create table statement that must have created the classic models.customer table. Now here, this horizontal output is not too useful in this case, so there is an option in MySQL Workbench, execute current statement in vertical text output. And here in vertical text output, this is the most useful way to see this information. Create table customers, and you can see the entire create table statement. Show indexes then, drilling down further into a specific table. And just the index. You see the primary key and the foreign key that were defined for the countries table. So there are many show commands because there are so many aspects of databases. Databases, tables, their columns, the administrative information as well. So show has hundreds of aspects to it. This is just an introduction to it. And you'd get good at it. I wouldn't try to memorize it, but if you have a job where you have to do it a lot, you'll learn the things you need to know. Thank you.